from the collaborative. And we think we have critical mass with the media who have already RSVP. I think we have a couple of outlets who may join us in a few more minutes, but we don't want to waste everyone's time. Just as some housekeeping tips, we are recording. And so if anyone would like to get a copy of this sent to them, please email Amy Barrios and let her know so she can send you the link so that you can download it. And you are also free to record it on your own if that's your preference. So Leah is I'm gonna have Leah, if you guys want to go to full view, Leah, if you can make sure that you're spotlighting the person who's speaking to make sure that that's the video that's showing up. Thank you very much. And we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Andronika Morris. A number of you know me as my work with Housing Louisiana. But today we're talking about the Louisiana Equitable Recovery Coalition and why we've come together. The groups who are here with us today, I'm going to introduce all of them in turn, and they're going to talk a little bit about why we felt it was so important to come together. These groups represent food security, mobility and transportation, economic security, education and childcare, sustainable infrastructure, accountable government, and housing. And we've come together around the concept of a just recovery for COVID. And we called this press conference because we were very distressed at the unanimous vote last week where our legislators working with the governor's office approved the allocation of $1.6 billion of COVID recovery to address things like movie theaters, operators, and logging industries. And while we don't marginalize those things or minimize those initiatives, we do think that there are bigger issues, and we think that the people who've been hurt the most in this recovery should be the first priority, and we haven't seen that yet. So we're going to talk a little bit today in turn about what are our concerns, what are our issues, and what do we see as the pressing need. And I'm going to turn it next over to Corey Patty, who is our partner on food security. Corey?
Yeah, thanks, Andronika. Corey Patty here with Feeding Louisiana, the State Association of Food Banks. Our 5-member Feeding America food banks are regionally located and serve all 64 parishes of the state, and have taken on a lot of work, obviously, over the last year and change in response to the COVID pandemic. I think one of the things that we really have to start with in talking about food insecurity in Louisiana is that this is a longstanding issue. This is not something new that has popped up due to the pandemic. It is like I said, a longstanding issue in the state that has only been exacerbated really by the pandemic. So, if we were having this conversation a little over a year ago, we would have talked about these 750-some thousand food insecure Louisianans that were trying to put food on their table, that weren't sure of where they would get their next meal, including 1 in 4 children, including 1 in 4 senior citizens. Some of the highest rates of food insecurity among those vulnerable populations in the country. And those numbers have only grown over the last 14 months. Right now, we work with Feeding America to get some estimates and some understanding around what those numbers are. And our projections say that number is much closer to 1 million people total overall that are experiencing food insecurity, that don't know, where or how they might buy their meals for themselves and their families. Those numbers of children that are food insecure have grown as schools have closed, and the meals that children could count on being served through their schools have decreased and declined. That access has declined. And the same thing goes for so many of those programs and opportunities that serve seniors across our state. One of the things that's popped up for us in understanding what some of the challenges are for food insecure people and the clients that our organizations serve is largely an access related one. the importance of being able to reach people in rural areas, people who have transportation challenges, people who, for whatever reason, cannot get assistance through some of the established federal programs, largely SNAP and TFAP. Trying to serve those populations and those groups of people has been a real challenge for us. So I think what we have talked about with our group and what needs to be highlighted here is the importance of the state making an investment in addressing food insecurity, addressing that foundational critical need of folks that has not been yet met at this point. We've seen a federal response that allocated more assistance to USDA commodities, increasing SNAP benefits, but for a state like Louisiana, which again has led the country or trailed the country really in making sure that the foundational things that its citizens need in terms of food and nutrition and resources and outcomes related to those things has not made a real commitment or financial investment from the legislative or administrative levels. I think speaks volumes to our priorities and unfortunately represents that those things are misplaced at this point. So our ask has been to those decision makers and those policy makers to understand the barriers that food insecure people across the state are facing, recognizing that there are opportunities to allocate these dollars and these resources to providing the things that they need, providing food, providing for the infrastructure and supplies that make food distribution and access to food easier for hungry Louisianans. And the models are out there. What we've seen across the country is a number of states, state legislatures, state governors who have said, we recognize this is a critical need and have allocated either state general fund or CARES Act dollars to addressing these issues. And that's what we've pushed for to date and are still working with this group, with our partners, to elevate our ask and elevate what the circumstances on the ground facing too many people are. So thanks, Andronika.
Thank you so much, Corey. And so next up, we're going to turn to Morgan Shannon with the Power Coalition. Morgan.
Thank you so much, Andronika. Quite frankly, we're exhausted. I think we're exhausted with the anti-people policies that keep coming down, that do not center community and center corporations. Louisiana has suffered through our fair share of disasters, and while disasters are just devastating on their own, our response and recovery and relief often compound the tragedy. We know it so well all throughout the state. And we know that our collective response to this disaster has to be different. We often always ignore our most affected, most vulnerable, and they're always Black and brown with multiple layers of oppression. And this response was no different. We know that centering corporations over community does not work. The money never gets to where it needs to get to. And we were already suffering pre-pandemic, and post and during, we're suffering more. Our neglect of our most vulnerable, like typically around childcare. If we don't necessarily invest in childcare, we will not be able to have an economy or where folks can actually thrive. We need to increase public investments in childcare. We need to make sure that the families have greater resources when it comes to childcare, particularly families who we now call like frontline or who are making so that our economy is sustainable. They need access to childcare. And I have a few statistics for you all. to kind of pull out. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows that the average salary for a kindergarten teacher in Louisiana is around $45,000 compared to $20,000 for childcare workers. In New Orleans, 37% have been able to access publicly funded seats in daycare, leaving over 9,000 children in like a gap, including an estimated 92% of the city's low-income infants. In East Baton Rouge, only 34% of children in need from birth through age 4 have access, leaving over 10,000 children in the gap. And so when we invest in things like logging or like the movie industry, as opposed to investing in the people who are needed the most, we neglect this whole population. And so we are just really tired. We're hearing from it from community. We've been saying it to the people who are in power for so long. And I don't know how much more our folks can take. If we invest in our most vulnerable, then our city thrives. We saw it in history when we had a big national crisis. Before we invested in workers, we invested in people. We have to do that again. And so we've joined this coalition because we know that together in a collective, our voices are stronger, that most of our constituency are overlaying their problems with housing insecurity, food insecurity, education, health, and all of those things. And we are demanding that you center people over profits.
Thank you so much, Morgan. We appreciate that. So next we're going to go to Jan Moeller from the Louisiana Budget Project. Jan?
All right. All right. Just wanted to make sure I'm unmuted. And thank you, Andronika, and everybody who's been on this. I think if we can zoom out for a little bit, we all know that the pandemic has taken a disproportionate toll in Louisiana on low-income communities, on Black and Brown communities. They have suffered disproportionately in the health effects and also the economic effects of this. And Louisiana has been given a rare opportunity to address these disparities through the $3.2 billion that the state received as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. And this week, the Treasury Department came out with some guidance of how they want that money to be used. And if you look through that guidance, the Treasury Department, which is in charge of interpreting the law, the American Rescue Plan Act, makes it very clear that they intend for these dollars to go to the people and the communities who were most affected by COVID, both in the health aspects and the economic aspects. And so they even said, and I'm quoting from the Treasury guidance, they said, we want people to, we want this to provide medical care for people affected and to, quote, address disparities in public health that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And they gave some examples, for example, investing in mental health, in substance use, in behavioral health services, crisis intervention services. They also talk about economic assistance for things like what Corey talked about, helping people to buy food, to pay their rent, to pay their utility bills, to provide broadband internet access. It also can include some basic things like cash assistance, legal aid to help people avoid eviction, job training, and things like helping small businesses and industries that have been affected by the pandemic. Here in Louisiana, while a lot of the rest of the country is really starting to get back on its feet, we have an economy that is largely grounded in tourism and energy extraction. And those are two industries that haven't come back as fast as other industry sectors. Now, I want to be clear that I don't think everything that is in the supplemental spending bill that made it out of the House is bad. There's a lot of good things in there. I think our complaint is that there's not enough going to address the very fundamental and basic needs in the communities and the people who've been hurt most by the pandemic. And so that's why we came together in this group. We've been talking together, we've been working together to try to address these disparities. We are asking policymakers to take them into account when they distribute this, because this is a chance that we're not going to get again as a state. $3.2 billion is a lot of money. It's temporary money. It's not going to last forever. So we need to be very mindful of the fact that the investments we make now in affected communities, in affected people to address disparities, need to be the kind of investments that can pay off for a long time and really help people, help lift people up. Because again, we know who suffered the most, and that's where we should be directing our resources. So appreciate everybody attending, and I want to turn it back to you, Andronika.
Thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. And those points are we wanted to make sure you guys heard from a diverse group of partners why we've been coming together around this. We'd like to open it up for members of the media to ask any and all of us any questions you might have.
This is Aubrey Killian at WDSU. I hope y'all are doing well, and I appreciate y'all hosting this. What is just your, y'all all brought up some great points, and I interviewed a family today that is struggling with childcare, food, money, all the above. What is y'all's biggest concern going into this, this money that could be, that Louisiana is expected to see? Just in a nutshell, what is your biggest fear?
That the families who have been hit the hardest won't get this recovery. That what we will do is this trickle down economics and investing in ways, and that doesn't hit the most basic needs. It is incomprehensible that the issues that these partners are talking about are not front and center inside of this piece of legislation, given the fact that these were some of the most pressing problems we had pre-COVID. They were made worse during COVID, and now we have $3.2 billion in COVID relief, and we don't see any significant investments for food, for childcare. And while there have been investments for housing, the housing investments have been mismanaged. And Corey and Shannon and Morgan, sorry, and Jan, y'all can please chime in.
I think I would echo what Andronika said. I think that the legislature seems determined to spend about half of this allotment, maybe a little bit more, in this budget year, and they put out a bill that now goes to the Senate. So we still have 5 weeks left in this legislative session to rearrange those priorities. And our hope that would be that as much money as possible flows to the communities that are most affected. And so this doesn't mean that movie theater owners haven't experienced a lot of pain, economic pain. That wasn't their fault. Stay-at-home orders. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be promoting tourism, but that may not be the highest and best use when we have people who, again, need a place for their children to be cared for so that they can go back to work, and who need help paying rent so that they don't get evicted when the moratorium expires, and who need broadband internet so their children can continue to learn at home. Those are the kind of direct needs that families are facing in this state. Many families were facing this before the pandemic, but again, this is an opportunity to make long-lasting investments. And again, we and Corey can speak to this much more eloquently, but we have a lot of needs in just basic food insecurity and making sure families in the state have enough to eat. And that is one of the things that the Treasury Department said should be a priority for this money, and we haven't seen it reflected yet in the legislation that made it through the House.
Yeah, I'll echo all of those things. I think Andronika and Jan spoke to it really well, but all of these issues that are central to the issues of poverty, right? And understanding what the circumstances of people living in poverty and how that impacts outcomes down the line for children, for adults, related to health and economics and jobs and well-being and such, physical, mental health. All of these things are correlated. And I think what we would want to see from the legislature is a recognition of that, number one, and a commitment to doing the things that are going to move the needle significantly by lifting the most people across the state.
Yeah, I mean, they all said what I was going to say. Like, it is not, it's not anything that we haven't been saying before, you know, and I just think that we just look towards history and as our guide. Like, imagine if we would have had community health centers on each corner in a pandemic reality, how much maybe this pandemic wouldn't have gotten places. You know who was asking for community health centers? Black and brown communities in the 60s and the 50s. You know what I mean? They were also asking for living wages. They were also doing all of these workers things. They were also asking for safe neighborhoods and sustainable housing. They were also asking for food. That's how we got free lunch and breakfast programs and those kinds of things. You know, the demand is great, and we weren't doing that well before the pandemic. And so, you know, when you ask, like, what is our main kind of like soundbite? Center people, stop these anti-people policies. The people are hurting, and they elected you to center them. And it's not necessarily even a Black or white issue, even though Black and brown people experience it disproportionately and more. But white folks are suffering too. Like, your neighbor is suffering. And so you need to do something about it. We have to be more human in our approach. And I don't know how else to say it. So everything that my colleague said is what we need to do. We need to center people.
Thank you for that question. Obviously, that gave us a lot of responses, Aubrey. Any other questions from any of the other media outlets, reporters? Okay, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And if anybody's trying to unmute, let us know. You know, we want to urge, the message we do want to leave you all with is that there's still an opportunity to fix this. There's still a chance for Louisiana to get this right. This bill, HB1, is going to go to the Senate. That's where this appropriation is, along with a number of other financial appropriations. And that will be heard by the Senate in any day now. And so we certainly hope to see that the Senate side will center people and ensure that Louisiana gets it right this time, that we have a just recovery. We have to make sure that the people who are hardest hit, the people who were struggling before, that they come out on top this time. Louisiana will not have many more bites at this apple. And we paid a steep price for this. The people who've lost their lives because of this pandemic, the people who are dealing with long-term illnesses because of this pandemic. And we need to make sure that we can make sure that people are better situated for the next time something happens, be it a polar vortex, be it another hurricane, or God forbid, another pandemic. So thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to talking to you in the next coming weeks. We will be doing this again when the Senate, whatever comes out of the Senate comes out, because we are going to be watching this. We are going to be monitoring this. We are going to be doing everything that we can to make sure that this is a just and equitable recovery. Thank you guys again.
One final note, I put a link in the chat for anybody who's interested to the Treasury guidance that I was referring to. So if anybody's interested in reading straight from the U.S. Treasury Department on how they interpret this law and the priorities that states should be emphasizing, it's there.
Okay, great. And we'll have Amy send it out to everybody too as well in her follow-up, Jan.
Okay.
Thank you. That's great. All right, if nobody has any other questions, thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.